The Venom franchise has been kind of confusing for someone who really enjoys not only Venom as a character but the concept of the symbiotes in general, and saying I'm a really big fan is an understatement. I have Venom and Carnage posters hung up around the game room. I own about 45 Venom comics and 20 that feature Carnage as well, and even the logo I use for Demon is based off of the Venom symbiote. So yeah, I love them quite a lot. But with that being said, it's really hard for me to love these movies. I can't even say I really like them. Now if you like this movie, then that's great. Judging by the amount of money it made, it seems that quite a lot of people did. But this movie was definitely either made for a younger audience or an audience that doesn't really care about the character's comic book counterpart. Say that 3 times fast. So today, I'm unfortunately going to go over how Venom, Let There Be Carnage became a movie that I hate about characters that I love. First, I'm going to run through a real quick overview of the story. Now this movie starts out about a year or so after the first one ends. It opens with what was supposed to be the introduction of our 2 antagonists and their love connection, but I'm too distracted by Woody Harrelson's voice dubbed over someone else's acting, but I can live with that. Also, as a comic fan, I wish they didn't show us what the cop's name was until later, and I'll get to my reasoning for that in a bit. But Venom and Eddie aren't the greatest roomies. Venom wants to be a quote-unquote lethal protector and fight bad guys mostly just to eat them because Eddie is forcing him on a diet of only chocolate and chickens, and he hates chickens. And the amount of times that Venom says lethal protector in this movie makes me think that the writers want us to think that they know their history of Venom and they did their research. Because for those of you who don't know, Venom Lethal Protector was the name of Venom's first solo comic series run. 1 or 2 mentions would have been fine, but it's mentioned like 6 times throughout the film, which is a little bit on the nose. Anyways, Eddie then gets to do an interview with Cletus Cassidy, who is a serial killer who's locked up and is about to get the perma-night-night juice, just for Venom to reach through the bars of the cell and then pull Eddie and Cletus closer together, where Cletus then bites his hand and getting a piece of the Venom symbiote along with it. Venom and Eddie then split up like the Beatles after this and then go their separate ways for a little while. Venom tries to find a new host, but none are working for him, and he actually went to a weird rave party, which was kind of pointless. But it's not the worst part in the movie. Don't worry, I'm getting there. When Cletus is about to get the perma-night-night juice, that's when the symbiote he bit off of Eddie actually decides to wake up and basically break him out of prison. Which would have been a lot cooler and more vicious in Rated R, I'm just saying. He then rescues his former girlfriend, who could emit powerful sonic screams, which is pretty ironic given their current circumstances with Carnage, but then the worst scene happens. Before Venom bonds back to Eddie, he bonds to Mrs. Chen, and Anne has to flirt with him to go back to Eddie, and my god, this scene was hard to sit through. The final battle is done in a church, which I'm guessing is supposed to be a throwback to how Venom was ripped off of Spider-Man when Eddie first bonded to this Venom symbiote in the comics, but that might be reaching for a little too much. The writers aren't quite that smart, I imagine. But let's give them the benefit of the doubt and say that they did do this intentionally and was kind of a throwback to Eddie's origin from the comics. They get into a big CGI fight, which I'll admit is a little cleaner than his fight versus Riot in the first movie, but Shriek ends up helping Eddie unintentionally. She dies by getting crushed by the church bell, Cletus gets his head bit off by Venom, and then Carnage the symbiote is also eaten by Venom. And then you have the post-credit scene, which was the only thing that people were talking about after this movie, or at least the only positive thing that I heard. And that's basically the whole movie. Now there's quite a lot wrong with this movie in my perspective as someone who is a fan of the comics, but also a fan of movies in general. But the part I'm most disappointed in is Cletus and Carnage. Now I'm actually going to start by talking about Carnage towards the end of the movie. At the very end, Eddie says that Cletus and Carnage are not symbiotic, but him and Venom are. Him and Venom are a better fit together, and that's why they can beat Carnage. Wrong. Cletus and Carnage are bonded at the blood level, the DNA level, which is why he's red. Which the trailers acted like it was a big deal, but you never actually learn why him being red is a bad thing. The movie never explains it. Now they actually do a pretty good visual representation for this, because look how Cletus becomes Carnage, and then look how Eddie becomes Venom. When Venom is taking over Eddie's body, he's basically putting on a suit around Eddie's body. He's basically just engulfing the entire body of Eddie. Now look how Cletus becomes Carnage. Carnage actually morphs out of his skin and out of his face, so it morphs it a little bit, rather than just putting a suit over his body. That is why Carnage says, "I am Carnage," and Venom and Eddie say, "We are Venom," because the nature of how they are bonded to one another. Venom and Eddie are two beings inhabiting one body basically, where Cletus and Carnage are a perfect fit, they are as one. So the reason that they can win this fight is not because they are more symbiotic than Carnage and Cletus, because that's a lie. It's because that Cletus and Carnage are not getting along. Now I know this is supposed to be an emotional moment for Eddie and Venom to come together to work towards a common goal, unlike they have through the rest of the film, but the reason they give just isn't true, so the whole thing just kind of falls flat. Come to think of it, you're actually never given a reason why Carnage is stronger than Venom and why he's more capable. Also, they made Venom and Carnage basically the same size. Maybe Carnage a little bit bigger, and definitely towards the end of the movie he was bigger, but in every iteration of Carnage in the comics, except for maybe Absolute Carnage, Venom was bigger. Now I'd like to think that this was done intentionally so that Carnage on a surface level doesn't seem like as big as a threat as Venom would be, but he is way more capable and way more powerful than Venom is. Like, come on Sony, size doesn't mean everything, right? Or is that a lie? Because this one time this girl told me that, but Eddie and Venom are not bonded at the same level that Cletus and Carnage are, so just with this one statement alone they already messed up the character of Carnage. Now Cletus is supposed to be basically a what if episode where the Joker gets a symbiote. That's basically what it boils down to. He finds humor by murdering people in a brutal way, as brutal as he can, not because he wants money or any power or has any sort of motive, it's literally just because he likes it. You never really get that psychotic feeling from Cassidy in this movie. Maybe slightly twisted and maybe a little off his rocker, but not a complete sociopath that just kills for fun. Shriek in the comics actually looks more like Domino did from Deadpool 2 than what she does in this movie, and she doesn't really have the biggest role through this story, but fine, she serves the plot I guess. But the way that they write Cletus, and even Eddie to some degree, is very lazy. Rather than showing us why Cletus is a serial killer, they just show us a few covered dead bodies and a scene where the walls of his cell are drawn all over because only crazy people draw on the walls. And the only scene where you get to potentially see the madness of how Cletus got to where he is today was done through animation. Kid-friendly animation that he narrates over in a very sarcastic and almost goofy voice. That's not very menacing at all. So the one time that you could have made something dark and gritty is his backstory, and even that you make it a fairly lighthearted kid-friendly scene. So let's change this scene up a little bit. Let's say rather than Eddie learning about his past on a card that he wrote him, how about he does it during an interview? You know, because he's a reporter. Cletus starts talking about his past and it starts getting a little emotional. He almost starts getting angry, like it's painful for him to talk about the past. That would be good foreshadowing for why he murdered his family rather than it just being done through a lighthearted cartoon. And it would make it much more engaging because you get to see an actual response from Cletus, an emotional response. So rather than doing a flashback scene through narration that's done through animation, why not do an actual interview? Then he does a flashback, you can see his point of view as a kid killing people. That would make him much more of a menacing threat than it would doing a goofy animation. So Cletus is supposed to be crazy, but we never feel it. He's supposed to be a serial killer, but we never see it. And we're supposed to feel threatened by him, but we never do. Carnage himself gets very little screen time as far as talking. You don't get a lot of same sort of dialogue between him and Cletus as you do with Eddie and Venom, so he doesn't actually feel like a fleshed out character. He honestly doesn't feel like any more fleshed out as a character than Riot did in the first film, and I don't remember anything about Riot. I've already talked about how the opening of this movie where Woody Harrelson is dubbing his voice over someone else's acting is kind of odd, but that's not really why I don't like the intro of this movie. I think the reason that they chose to open the movie with the love connection between Cletus and Shriek is because they have such little chemistry throughout the rest of the movie that they have to open with it, because otherwise we'll have a hard time believing that they have any love connection at all. They're just a strange couple, like they don't seem like a couple. But you know what else is strange? The way that Cletus gets Carnage in the first place. Okay, he bites it off of Eddie. So is that why he's red from Eddie's blood? But he said he didn't taste blood. Why not have Eddie punch Cletus in the mouth to get him off of him, and that's how Carnage gets into his bloodstream? Or have the toxin that was going to kill him in the chair mixed with the symbiote inside of him and it reacts badly, and that's how he becomes so strong. They don't explain why he's red, they don't explain why it's important, and they don't explain why he's stronger than Venom. If you haven't read the comics, you can probably brush past it and it won't really matter, but since I have, I just have more questions than they have answers. My one big question is, why was it rated PG-13? Why? Carnage's first 30 seconds on screen were great because it felt like a horror movie, but after he starts attacking the guards, it starts to feel like the PG-13 rating is really holding it back. Also, why are all the prisoners cheering for a giant monster wreaking havoc in the prison? Because it's bad and they're bad? They don't know Cletus is in there, they don't know what the monster's motives are, they don't even know it's a monster! Why are they cheering for it? Doesn't really make sense, but alright. He then goes and breaks out his so-called love interest, and she learns that Carnage doesn't like sound. That surely won't be important later, right? And at the very end, they try to shoehorn in some emotion behind Cletus's motivation for why he killed his family, and that's because he was abused by them. Now this could have been a really cool reveal and very emotional, if they had not done the stupid animation flashback before. So back at that point, they could have done a real flashback scene of him killing his family, not through animation, and then come back up to this scene and then do another flashback from the other side of the coin where he's getting abused by that family. Now, I don't really care if there's any sort of emotional tie behind Cletus's motivations at all. He's a killer that likes killing, with or without the monster. Leave it at that for all I care. But if you're gonna try to make some sort of emotional tie and us sympathize with the villain, you can't just kind of shoehorn it in there at the last second. That's like he said all he wanted to do in the end was be Eddie's friend. That's basically like opening a door and shouting, "I'm a person too, you should care about me," before slamming the door and rolling the credits. So rather than showing us why we should kind of care for this character before he dies, they just kind of tell us that we should. And they do very similar things with Eddie and Venom. We are told that Eddie is an amazing reporter and always gets the information he needs, but in this movie, he doesn't do anything. Eddie is pretty clueless and Venom is the one who picks up the clues and baby steps Eddie through it. And he does one thing involving Cletus Cassidy and the reporter says he put him back on top. But we never actually see him doing anything on his own other than approaching a man in the first movie, accusing him of a bunch of stuff that sure, was all correct, I'll give it to you that, but it gets him fired and loses him his fiancée, so we never actually see him being a good reporter. Now Venom is being written in a way that he basically comes off as a toddler, not far from that of Hulk from Thor Ragnarok. I get it, he wants to eat people, he needs brains, yada yada, and Eddie doesn't want that to happen, but it sounds like two children arguing. After eating some chickens, Venom actually says that their talents are being wasted sitting on the sidelines. Also, side note, why does nobody in this movie know how to react when a giant monster they've never seen before comes out of nowhere and appears in front of them? The prisoners were cheering it on, and Venom and Eddie actually rescues this one chick and she's just sitting there staring at them like it's a car crash or something, like a bad fender bender, and she's like, ooh, but it's a monster! Why does nobody know how to react to a monster? It states later in the movie that the people that were locked up in the same place that Shriek was were freaking out about a monster after Carnage broke them out. So if they freak out about a monster and they're like clinically insane, why are normal people not even like batting an eye towards it? They're cheering it on and kind of like, ooh, that's kind of scary, look. What? No. Calm down, calm down. Anna's in this movie for a moment, but doesn't really serve anything other than making me cringe a little bit later, but we'll get into that. Now, after Anne tells Eddie that she is engaged to her new fiancé, this is a good moment, or it could have been a great moment for Eddie and Venom. After Eddie learns this, he goes around driving his motorcycle recklessly and talks to Venom about how he can't be hurt permanently because Venom will fix it. Venom responds with saying that he is sorry because he cannot fix a broken heart. It is emotional pain. It's not something that can be fixed or healed. It's done through time. And just like a Marvel fashioned movie, rather than letting the emotions build and kind of linger there and let us kind of feel it out, it's just used as a bridge to comedy. This could have been the best emotional scene of the movie and you just ruin it with comedy. That's so Marvel of you. The only scene that I laughed at that they actually intentionally wanted me to laugh at was this scene.
You suck! You suck!
Excuse me?
Yeah, wow. I don't have an explanation for that. I think I'm having a panic attack.
Also, Venom does quite a lot for trying to be inconspicuous and stay hidden. It doesn't seem like he cares that much. This does start arguments between Eddie and Venom, and I think that's the only real reason that they do it like this. They need a reason for Eddie and Venom to split up so that when they reunite, it's an exciting feeling. Except it's not. When they split, Venom goes to a rave party because, hey man, I just want to be free, which felt like such an out of place scene. The only thing we really get from this scene is Venom saying that he wants to be free from the Eddie closet, quote unquote, and is not ashamed to be shown, and then at the end, the scene is talking about him missing Eddie. So what was the point of the scene in the first place? To extend the runtime? Anyways, while Venom is at the rave, Eddie actually learns that Cletus escaped, and the first thing that he asks himself is what would Venom do? I'm sorry, give me 1 second. You're a famous reporter! You know, the kind of people that find out information that people don't want you to know. Why does he immediately want to do what Venom would do when it's supposed to be his profession to find out things that people don't want to be found? Which in this case is just Cletus Cassidy's location. He goes and finds out what Cletus is going to be going after, which is literally written on the first tree he comes across, and then he calls the one person who would know exactly what that clue meant. Well, that's pretty convenient. I feel like this plot holds your hand and walks you through it, and it still doesn't really make sense. But let's talk about that for a second. So the writers want to double down on the comedy side of the first movie, yet introduce you to one of the darkest and most sinister characters in all of Marvel. Even when you see Carnage killing people, there's no blood. There's very few dead bodies, and the ones that you see are either just covered or they look like they have their head missing. There's no cynical laughter or jokes. None of that. Like there's a part in the prison break scene where he pulls a bench closer to himself and then trips one of the guards with it. Like that's kinda lame for the scene that you want to show how crazy, powerful, and ruthless this dude is. And if he did it, why not have him crack a joke and then smash him with it or something? So it wants the scenes with Carnage to feel almost thriller/horror-esque, but when it comes to Eddie and Venom, it's poorly written jokes at the most random times. So if you're gonna make it more of a comedy, why not have the character that finds thrills in killing be the one that makes sarcastic remarks while killing people? And the ending was a huge letdown. There has never been a situation that I can recall that Carnage has ever been beaten by Venom in a one-on-one fight. Ever. He usually always has to get assistance from Spider-Man. But if you put that to the side, when Venom and Carnage first meet, Venom is so scared he goes back into Eddie, basically proving that Carnage is just this walking entity, just force that Venom does not want to face. But in this fight, he gets knocked around, Eddie tells him a lie about him having a stronger bond than the other two and that they're not symbiotic or whatever, Shriek yells after Venom slaps her into a bell, and then Venom eats both Cletus and Carnage. Like, are you kidding me? Literally after finding out that the movie was only an hour and a half and rated PG-13, the one thing I wanted them to do in this movie was not kill Cletus. There are ways for him to come back. With Carnage being bonded at the blood level, he could basically regenerate Cassidy from being fatally injured, but if this is it for Cletus, then dude, you wasted one of the best characters in symbiote history and just Marvel history in general. Sorry for my little rant. Just one more point about the comedy of this film. This scene, which is supposed to be funny, is one of the hardest scenes I've ever had to sit through. Ever. It's supposed to be funny, but me and my brother were literally cringing sitting next to each other trying to watch this. So Venom is in Mrs. Chen, and Anne shows up to look for Venom, and she's basically trying to find a way to get Venom and Eddie to reunite. How does she do it? She flirts to get Venom to go back to Eddie. And this scene is so hard to watch. First they are arguing, but after that, Anne flirts with Venom by calling him sexy and hot and Jesus Christ, this movie is strange. I also found it kind of strange that the way this movie sets up different things in a very organic way, just for it to lead to something different than you would expect it to. Like I wish, rather than in the first 5 seconds of the movie, they didn't do a close-up on the name badge of the cop. Because for those of us who read the comics, you know just from his name he's going to be in the sequel, he's going to live, and you know what he's going to be. So I wish they left that a little more ambiguous until later in the film. But this movie has a really bad relation between setups and payoffs. For example, they set up in the first film that Eddie was the top of the top reporter, but in this movie, Venom does the majority of the detective work, so there's a setup with no payoff. In the scene where Cletus bites Eddie, he sets a voice recorder on the jail cell, so you think when Eddie reached for it, that's when he would get bit, right? That's when he would bite Eddie. No. Venom throws a fit by lashing out and slinging Cletus all over his cell and then bringing him and Eddie together, and then he bites him. And the cop that was sitting behind Eddie didn't notice any of that? No cameras on this incredibly dangerous character caught a view of him attacking a reporter? Or if it did, no one looked at it? Does that make sense? You had a very organic way for it to happen, you even set it up, but you did it this way and it opens more questions. Like I talked about earlier in the video, it states how Carnage is a red one, but you never learn what that actually means. Yes, he's a red one. Gold star by your name on the board for pointing that one out there, little Venom, but why does that matter? I know why he's red in the comic books, but that doesn't matter here, so either explain why it's important or don't mention it. That's like if someone saw Venom and they were like, oh no, he's a black one. Okay, does that matter? Moving on. Venom breaks Eddie out of the police department, which again, no cameras caught that, but okay, I guess there's no cameras in the Venomverse. Another example, Carnage wants Shriek to stop screaming, so he starts to strangle her. Cletus doesn't like that at all, setting up Carnage and Cletus not getting along because of Shriek. Okay, I can see that. This would be a great way to get Venom and Shriek to team up to beat Carnage. Venom could just talk to her about Cletus not being in control and Carnage will kill her using him. That's a very organic way to set it up, right? And you even get to skip the misinformation that Venom and Eddie have a stronger bond than Cletus and Carnage. But what did they do? Venom smacks Shriek into a bell and she screams, dropping everyone through the roof of the church. It was so well set up and you did that? Then, in the end credit scene, they don't even write what sounds like a normal, organic conversation. Eddie says someone on TV shouldn't keep secrets. Venom says, we all have secrets. And when Eddie asks him if he's hiding anything, he says he has 80 billion years of hive mind knowledge across universes. Now that's a really weird thing to point out in this conversation, but alright. Then they cross into the MCU, presumably, where he looks at Spider-Man all menacingly as if he knows who that is, which the only way he would know is if he had a hive mind across the multiverse, which it just so happened to conveniently learn about right before this happened. Does that make sense? Nothing happens organically in this movie. They set something up and then they do something completely different out of nowhere. Or they just give you information out of nowhere. like about Carnage being red, or the way that this conversation took a weird turn right before the moment that information would be needed. It's just lazy writing. Having a good relation between setup and payoffs in a film is what makes it more engaging and allows the beginning of the film to seem more significant as it impacts the rest of the film rather than it being like exposition dumping. Cletus Cassidy and Carnage are perfect characters for the big screen because of how easy they are to write. They literally enjoy killing and don't care about anything or anyone. And with Carnage being so powerful and unpredictable, it would make him much more of an enjoyable villain to watch if they doubled down on the unpredictability and dark nature of the character. He doesn't need to have an emotional tie by wanting to be Eddie's friend. You can leave in the part about him being abused, but show us that, rather than having Cletus tell us. You could show how serious of a threat Cletus is, as well as why he's so twisted by showing scenes or flashbacks of him murdering his family after being abused by them. That would give us much more of an understanding for why he's a ruthless murderer and witnessing firsthand what he's capable of without a symbiote. If you've seen the Daredevil show, imagine instead of seeing the Punisher mow down that room of Irish mobsters, you heard about it from someone reading the newspaper, or instead you had Frank Castle telling people that he did that rather than showing us that he did it, from the perspective of the victims. If you want the audience to feel like we need to take a character seriously, then show us why. Don't tell us through dialogue. The PG-13 rating might have been what was holding that back. Maybe they couldn't do vicious replays of his past because of that rating. But if they followed the rule of show don't tell, it could have made this movie so much better. Instead, they gave us a bad comedy movie about one of the darkest characters in Marvel history and made it an hour and a half long. Carnage could have been an Avenger-level threat if he was written properly, and this is what we get when he isn't. A watered-down poor man's version of a Venom movie. That's why I say that this movie is a comic book movie for non-comic readers. Because as someone who loves the Venom character and the other symbiotes in general, I find this film incredibly disappointing, because it made a movie I hate about characters that I love. So I would give this movie a 3 out of 10, but because the Mrs. Chen scene, I'm giving this movie a 2 out of 10. If you like this movie, I'm glad at least somebody did, because I think the characters of Eddie Brock, Venom, Cletus, and Carnage deserve a way better movie than this one is. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and have a marvelous day.